One of the beautiful things about a dedicated amplifier is they are simple. Simple to use, simple to set up. You simply turn them on, plug in your speaker cables, and you're done. Maybe there's a trigger if you want to actually turn it on automatically from a preamp, which is actually an input that simplifies the product even further. Mono amps are even simpler than that because they eliminate the chance of any crosstalk and you're just dealing with one channel at a time. Aiyima has decided to make the simple, well, not so simple. Anyone familiar with my reviews knows I go after what I don't like first. So let's start with the cons, and there's a lot of cons. You might ask, how many cons can there be in a monoblock amp? Either it sounds good or it doesn't. But Aiyima decided to take what is supposed to be a simple product and thus created a lot of problems by complicating it. I don't know where the Aiyima marketing people got their idea of adding a volume control knob on a monoblock amp. Yes, I actually preferred it on the A70 stereo amp because you're controlling both the speakers at the same time in unison. But separate volume controls on a monoblock amps? Worse yet, they're analog pots, so you'll never know if you've actually truly set the two different mono amps equally. Well, you can know, which is simply by setting the volume to maximum and let the preamp handle the volume. So why is there a volume knob in the first place? To look cool, maybe? And there's another big knob on the front, unmarked except for SWFREQ. This allows you to set the frequency cutoff to your passive subwoofer. What? You can run both a passive sub and passive speakers from this one device? No, you can't. But you can choose which one you want to run by flipping the switch at the bottom to sub. It's a wonderful option for the 7 people in the world who want to use a Class D amplifier as a passive sub amplifier. What's also wonderful about the big SW frequency knob is Aiyima left it wonderfully unmarked, leaving you with absolutely no idea what frequency you're using. Again, it's a manual pot, so assuming you're running a pair of passive subwoofers using 2 of these amplifiers, the chances of you getting the frequency cut off correctly on both of them is close to 0 without using an SPL meter. So why in the world would there be an SW frequency knob that will probably be useless for the vast majority of purchasers? Because in Aiyima's infinite wisdom, they are trying to differentiate their product from Fosi, and not differentiate, in my opinion, in good ways. Like getting the damn power supply inside the unit, adding 2 TI chips to run the separate speakers, but putting them in the same chassis, so you essentially have 2 monoblock amps into one chassis with 2 dedicated power cords. No, Aiyima didn't collaborate with me. They decided to instead give us 20th century manual, unmarked subwoofer frequency controls and volume controls, slapping big knobs in the front probably just to look cool because it does nothing if you don't hook this up to a passive subwoofer. You have active subwoofer, this is meaningless. On the back is another manual control for when to cut off the frequency to an active subwoofer. At least this one's labeled minimum and maximum with the frequency minimum and maximum. But everything in between, you're back to guessing. Do you actually own 2 passive or 2 active subwoofers? If so, good luck matching these frequency controls. You might get close to being accurate, but is that why you're involved in this hobby, to get close? A little more bass coming from one subwoofer than the other? Is it just a room reflection? A room mode? You figure out the issue, because it could be these aren't set the same. Let's take a final look at the unit. On the left front, there is an on-off button, marked auto off because you can hook up a 12-volt trigger to it. That is a nice feature, which the Fosi V3 Mono does not have. It only has an auto sensing trigger, which isn't terrible, but for true control, you want a real trigger. We already went over the 2 useless knobs in the front, and there's the RCA balance switch. And here I will give Aiyima credit for the color change from red to blue when switching between RCA and balanced. Nicely done, Aiyima. On the bottom, as we already discussed, is the ability to switch from a passive subwoofer if you're using one. On the rear, we have the balanced input, the RCA input with a 6 dB switch, which you're going to need to put on. But because these chip amps do better in testing with the 6 dB off, they add it because once you get one to your house, you'll be complaining about the power output. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You've also got the sub output, a little frequency control, and 12-volt trigger input, speaker binding posts, and of course our power input. The first, and in my opinion most important part of my listening test, doesn't require 600 hours of the great Bish, because I'm interested in sheer, unadulterated power. And the word on this 300 watt into 4 ohm monoblock amplifier is the same word I've used about all the cheap class D amps I've tested. Anemic, anemic, and anemic. Fed using both my CD players, balanced, and RCA connections, as well as fed from a preamps balanced and the preamps RCA connections. This supposedly 300 watt into 4 ohm amplifier, like the Fosi, struggled to get beyond anything decently loud running a pair of SVS Ultra Evolution bookshelf speakers or my Tannoy DC8 Ti floor standers. Everything cranked to max volume, and it got to about 95 dBs in my room. Don't get me wrong, fed with the 5-volt signal the amplifier wants, the full 5 amp power supply, of which I was only sent the 3 amp power supply, I'm certain it can get a lot louder, but I'll make this but bigger than usual. That's not how 99% of the people who buy this will use it. They might buy the 5 amp power supply, but they are going to simply plug in the equipment they have and listen, either through a preamp or directly. When AB amps are usually expecting a 2-volt signal, most people will be shocked that an old AB 50-watt amp they have sitting around will outpower this Aiyima or the Fosi's monoblocks from start to finish. After 600 hours of Bish, there is good news for the very few of you who still have an interest in this product. Aiyima has done an excellent job taming the Class D issue of load dependency, as Fosi did as well. Literally, only a slight half dB drop after about 17 kilohertz. It was so slight that it wasn't audible to me in listening testing, unless listening to test tones. I will say what was nice was hooking up an active sub directly to the amp. I like the sub output. It doesn't need anything else. Just give me the sub output. But the controls aren't necessary because any half-decent subwoofer can handle the frequency crossover itself. And since the amp doesn't control subwoofer output volume, well, let's just say you're going to have to listen at the same level unless you want to keep playing with your sub's volume control all the time. Aiyima took a simple but wonderful product, the monoblock amp, overcomplicated it with features, some of which are useless, all of which are useless to somebody depending on how you're going to be using it. If you use it with a passive sub, you're not going to use the volume control. If you use it with passive speakers, you're not going to use it with the passive sub controls. So like a chef who overthinks a dish, Aiyima overthought the monoblock amplifier. But there is no such thing as an overly complex wine. So how do we rate it? Obviously the 71 ingredient Commonwealth, which looks great, but no one other than the creator ever bothered making one, because no one in their right mind needs a drink that complex. And we're going to pair this Commonwealth with a chicken marsala with acorns. No, not acorn squash. That would be delicious. But acorns from an acorn tree. The chef has decided to take a simple dish and overly complicate it with his own twist. And instead of creating a masterpiece, it leaves a bitter taste in your mouth. Being different is wonderful, but being different for the sake of being different is a sin. Worse yet, Aiyima, you took what is literally the simplest product and instead of improving it, say with a better form factor, nice speaker binding posts, a built-in power supply, You listen to a bunch of idiots on some Reddit forum who kept saying, why can't my Fosi V3 do this, this, or this? And instead of realizing those people are idiots and are asking because they simply don't even understand the purpose of a monoblock amplifier, you created a product for 1% of the 1% of the idiots. I know people still get excited to see 300 watts slapped on the box for only 200 bucks, roughly. I don't know exactly the price of Aiyima, they haven't told me yet. But with nearly a 5-volt input requirement, you aren't going to get anywhere near that performance that you want from most source equipment. I still believe the bargain amplifier is the Outlaw 2220, a $400, 300 watt monoblock capable of achieving those readings with only 1.4 volt input. And for those not looking at a bargain, but still an excellent deal nonetheless, the $1,400 Aperion Audio E2, a 2-channel amplifier which can reach 330 watts per channel with only 1.3 volts input. Both have more trigger options, more importantly trigger outputs, so you can chain the amps with even more equipment. If you're still in the market for a Class D amplifier, pass on the Aiyima. Get the Fosi V3 Mono. That's all for this edition of the Scientific Audiophile. Have a great day.